The encounter. The airport buzzed with its usual energy. Families saying tearful goodbyes, business people rushing with laptops in hand, and travelers wandering aimlessly in search of coffee. Among them was Elijah Carter, a tall man in his early 40s, dressed in a casual hoodie and jeans. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floors as he carried a worn leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His appearance was understated, blending in with the crowd as though he was just another passenger headed to another destination. Elijah, however, was anything but ordinary. As the CEO of Skylink International Airlines, he had built the company from the ground up, starting with a single rusted plane that he bought with a loan. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and relentless determination had turned his small venture into one of the most successful airlines in the world. But today, Elijah had chosen to fly incognito, preferring to observe the experience of an everyday passenger rather than the pampered luxury his status often afforded him. As he approached the gate, Elijah felt a familiar pang of anticipation. He was scheduled to attend a high-stakes business summit on the other side of the country. The stakes were enormous, a potential partnership that could expand Skylink's reach into untapped markets. But his mind wasn't on the meeting. It was on something simpler. A chance to see how his airline treated its customers when no one knew the CEO was watching. The gate area was crowded but orderly. A sharp voice cut through the hum of chatter. First-class passengers only. The gate agent snapped at a young couple who had wandered too close to the priority boarding line. The agent was a woman in her late 20s, with her hair tied tightly into a bun and an expression that radiated authority. Her uniform was immaculate, and her posture was rigid, as though she were ready to confront any challenge head-on. Elijah joined the line for first-class boarding, his ticket and ID in hand. As he reached the front, the agent glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the boarding scanner. He handed her his ticket with a polite nod. Her reaction was immediate and sharp. She snatched the ticket, her eyes narrowing as she looked him up and down. "Sir, this line is for first-class passengers only," she said, her tone condescending. Elijah raised an eyebrow, surprised but not rattled. "I know," he replied calmly. She scrutinized the ticket, flipping it over as though searching for some hidden flaw. "This can't be right," she muttered under her breath. "Did you purchase this ticket yourself?" The question hung in the air, each word dripping with insinuation. Elijah felt the weight of the stares from the other passengers, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. His mind raced, but he kept his voice even. "Yes, I did." The gate agent's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she tore the ticket in half and tossed it into the trash. The ripping sound was loud, deliberate, and final. "This ticket is invalid," she declared, folding her arms across her chest. "You need to step aside." The crowd gasped audibly, a wave of murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Phones were raised, their screens glowing as people recorded the scene. Elijah stood still for a moment, his heart pounding but his expression calm. He had faced countless challenges in his career, but this felt different. It was personal, a direct attack on his integrity. "May I speak to your supervisor?" Elijah asked, his voice steady. The agent smirked, her confidence bolstered by the authority she believed she held. "You can take it up with customer service," she said dismissively, waving him away. Before Elijah could respond, a voice from the crowd rang out. "Why'd you tear up his ticket?" A young woman holding a smartphone stepped closer, her tone bold. "That's not right." The agent faltered, her smirk slipping. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the growing number of eyes on her. Just then, a man in a suit and tie approached, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He was the gate supervisor, and his badge identified him as Marcus. "What's going on here?" Marcus asked, looking between Elijah and the gate agent. Elijah held up the torn pieces of his ticket. "This happened," he said simply. Marcus's eyes widened as he took the fragments from Elijah. He turned to the agent, his tone sharp. did you do this?" The agent stammered, her earlier confidence crumbling. I thought it was fake," she muttered. "You thought?" Marcus's voice rose. "That's not your call to make. Sir, I deeply apologize for this. Let me make this right." As Marcus led Elijah toward the first-class lounge, the murmurs of the crowd followed them. The incident wasn't over. It had merely shifted to a quieter setting. Elijah glanced back briefly, catching the worried expression on the agent's face as the crowd continued to film and discuss. The lounge was serene, a stark contrast to the chaos at the gate. Marcus handed Elijah a new ticket and bowed his head slightly. "Please, sir, enjoy the lounge. I'll ensure you're boarded without further issue." Elijah nodded but said nothing. He sat in a plush chair, the torn ticket still in his pocket, its jagged edges a reminder of what had just unfolded. This was more than an inconvenience. It was a lesson, a window into the struggles his customers might face, and a stark reminder that success didn't always shield you from prejudice. As Elijah waited for his flight, his thoughts churned. This wasn't just about a single incident or a single agent. It was about a system, a culture, and the biases that ran deep within it. He resolved to turn this moment into something greater, a change that could ripple far beyond the walls of this airport. Behind closed doors, the first-class lounge exuded an air of exclusivity, its muted tones and soft lighting creating a serene atmosphere. Elijah Carter sat in one of the oversized leather chairs near the window, his mind replaying the events from the gate. The jagged edges of the torn ticket in his pocket felt like a physical manifestation of the disrespect he had just endured. Around him, the lounge hummed with quiet activity, executives on their laptops, travelers sipping drinks, and attendants offering trays of hors d'oeuvres. Elijah didn't reach for the complimentary wine or appetizers. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. The young woman who had recorded the incident had approached him earlier, quietly offering to send him the video. Her courage was a flicker of light in an otherwise frustrating experience. He tapped on her message and watched the video again, the sound of the ticket tearing echoing sharply. The crowd's gasps, the gate agent's dismissive smirk, and the visible discomfort of the onlookers all played out like a scene from a bad movie. Only this wasn't fiction, it was reality. Elijah's thoughts were interrupted when Marcus, the gate supervisor, approached cautiously. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice low and conciliatory, "I've informed the airline's management about what happened. They want to make this right. The flight attendant will face disciplinary action, and we're offering you a complimentary upgrade on your next flight." Elijah's eyes flicked to Marcus, his expression calm but unreadable. "Disciplinary action," he repeated. "And that's supposed to fix what exactly?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. "I understand your frustration, sir. Please know this incident doesn't reflect our values." Elijah leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "And what exactly are your values, Marcus? Do they include teaching your staff to make assumptions based on appearance, to strip people of their dignity because they don't look like they belong?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond but faltered, clearly unprepared for the pointed questions. I assure you, sir, this isn't typical." Elijah leaned back, shaking his head. "No, Marcus, it's not atypical either. It's systemic. You might think you're addressing the problem by disciplining one employee, but this is bigger than her. It's about the culture your company allows to fester." Marcus swallowed hard, his face pale. "I'll relay your concerns to the higher-ups, Mr. Carter," he said finally, retreating with a bow of his head. As Marcus walked away, Elijah felt a pang of frustration. These exchanges were always the same: apologies, promises of change, and then nothing. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number of Evelyn Rousseau, Skylink's head of public relations. Evelyn was sharp, tenacious, and fiercely loyal to the brand they had built together. If anyone could turn this moment into something meaningful, it was her. The call connected almost instantly. "Evelyn," Elijah began, his voice calm but firm. "I need you to meet me at the corporate office in 2 hours. We have a situation." Evelyn didn't need more details to understand the gravity of his tone. "I'll be there," she said without hesitation. 2 hours later, Elijah stepped out of the sleek black car that had transported him to Skylink's corporate headquarters. The building was an architectural marvel, a towering structure of glass and steel that seemed to reach for the clouds. The lobby was bustling, its marble floors reflecting the light streaming in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Evelyn was waiting for him near the elevator banks, her sharp features framed by a sleek bob. She was impeccably dressed, as always, her tailored suit exuding authority. "Elijah," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone used to managing crises. "What happened?" Elijah handed her the torn ticket, the jagged edges speaking volumes. He explained the incident at the gate, sparing no detail. Evelyn's expression hardened as he spoke, her eyes narrowing. "That's unacceptable," she said firmly. "We can't allow this to go unchecked." Elijah nodded. "I agree, but this isn't just about one employee. It's about the culture we've allowed to develop. This needs to be addressed publicly, and we need a plan that goes beyond damage control." Evelyn's mind was already racing, the gears turning as she considered the implications. "We'll start with a public statement," she said, "acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility, and outlining the steps we'll take to prevent this in the future. Transparency will be key." Elijah gave her a measured look. "And what about the employee?" "The usual script is to scapegoat her, fire her, and move on. But that doesn't solve anything." Evelyn nodded slowly. "You're right. We need to address this as a systemic issue. Training, accountability, and ongoing monitoring." "But Elijah," she hesitated, "this might bring backlash. People might see this as an attack on our brand." Elijah's jaw tightened. If the brand can't survive the truth, then maybe it's not worth protecting. Our values are meaningless if they're just words on a website. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Let's go upstairs and get to work." The conference room was spacious and modern, its walls adorned with photos of Skylink's achievements, a timeline of milestones from its humble beginnings to its global dominance. Seated around the table were key executives, their faces a mixture of concern and defensiveness. Among them was Ethan Calloway, the company's COO, who had a reputation for being pragmatic to a fault. Ethan spoke first, his voice smooth but clipped. "Elijah, we've heard about the incident. It's unfortunate, but let's not blow this out of proportion. We've already removed the gate agent from her position, and we're implementing additional training. That should suffice." Elijah's gaze hardened. "Suffice for what, Ethan?" "To make us feel better. To put a bandage on a broken system." Ethan bristled slightly but said nothing. Elijah continued, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about one employee's actions. It's about what allowed her to feel justified in those actions. It's about the culture we've created, or failed to create. If we don't address that, we're complicit." The room fell silent, the weight of Elijah's words sinking in. Evelyn spoke next, her tone measured. "Elijah's right. This is an opportunity to lead by example. We need to be transparent, take responsibility, and implement meaningful change. That starts with acknowledging the problem publicly." One of the executives, a man named Peter, cleared his throat. "But won't that damage our reputation? We've worked hard to build Skylink as a symbol of excellence." Elijah fixed him with a steady gaze. "Excellence isn't just about profits or customer satisfaction, Peter. It's about integrity. If we sweep this under the rug, we're not excellent. We're hypocrites." Peter shifted uncomfortably, but didn't argue further. The discussion continued, the group debating the best course of action. By the end of the meeting, a plan was in place. A public statement, a comprehensive review of Skylink's policies, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, and an independent audit of workplace culture. As the meeting adjourned, Evelyn turned to Elijah. "This won't be easy," she said. Elijah nodded. "Change never is, but it's necessary." As he left the conference room, Elijah felt a flicker of hope. The torn ticket was still in his pocket, a tangible reminder of the challenges ahead. But for the first time that day, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. The battle wasn't over, but the fight had begun. A reckoning. Elijah Carter sat in his office the next morning, a corner suite overlooking the bustling city below. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows on the polished desk where a stack of reports and a freshly brewed cup of coffee waited. But Elijah wasn't focused on the view or the work in front of him. His mind was consumed by the events of the previous day and the chain reaction it had triggered. The torn ticket, now smoothed out and taped together, sat in a frame on his desk. It wasn't there for decoration. It was a symbol, a constant reminder of the work that needed to be done. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the emails that had flooded in overnight. Most were from executives, offering their support or carefully worded justifications for why such incidents were isolated. A few, however, were from employees, ground staff, flight attendants, and even maintenance workers, sharing their own stories of microaggressions and biases within Skylink. One email in particular caught his attention. It was from a woman named Maria Sanchez, a junior customer service agent at the same airport where the incident had occurred. Her message was short but powerful. Subject: "Thank you for speaking out. Mr. Carter, I watched what happened at the gate yesterday, and I wanted to thank you for not letting it slide. Incidents like that happen more often than people realize, but most of us feel powerless to do anything about it. Knowing someone in your position is willing to stand up gives me hope that things might actually change." Maria Sanchez. Elijah felt a surge of determination as he read her words. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every employee who had ever felt silenced, dismissed, or marginalized. He replied immediately, thanking Maria for her courage and promising that her voice would be part of the change. By midday, the corporate headquarters was abuzz with activity. Evelyn Russo had assembled a team of public relations specialists, legal advisors, and policy analysts in the main conference room. The walls were lined with whiteboards and sticky notes, each detailing aspects of the plan they had crafted the night before. Elijah entered the room, his presence commanding attention. "Where are we?" he asked, his tone brisk. Evelyn stepped forward. "We finalized the draft for the public statement," she said, handing him a printed copy. "It's transparent, takes responsibility, and outlines our initial steps for change." Elijah scanned the statement, nodding as he read. It was a strong start, but he knew words alone wouldn't be enough. "And the internal measures?" he asked. A policy analyst named Darren spoke up. "We're proposing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, starting at the executive level. We've also reached out to independent consultants to audit our workplace culture and provide recommendations." Elijah looked at the team. "Good, but this can't just be a one-time fix. I want ongoing measures, annual reviews, anonymous reporting channels, and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior." Evelyn nodded. "We're on it, but there's something else you should know." She hesitated, and Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Evelyn gestured to a screen displaying trending hashtags on social media. #TornTicket and #StandWithElijah were among the top tags, with thousands of posts discussing the incident. The video recorded by the young woman at the gate had gone viral, sparking a heated conversation about racism and bias in the airline industry. Elijah felt a mix of emotions, frustration that the incident had become public so quickly, but also a sense of opportunity. "This isn't just about Skylink anymore," he said. "This is a chance to set a precedent for the entire industry." That afternoon, Elijah held a town hall meeting for Skylink employees. The room was packed, with standing room only as staff from all levels of the company gathered to hear what he had to say. The tension was palpable, a mix of curiosity, hope, and skepticism filling the air. Elijah stepped up to the podium, the framed ticket in his hand. He held it up for everyone to see. "This," he began, his voice steady but firm, "is what happens when we let bias go unchecked. It's not just a torn piece of paper, it's a symbol of the barriers we still face and the work we still need to do." The room was silent, every eye on him. "I won't stand here and pretend that this is an isolated incident," Elijah continued. "It's not. It's part of a system that has been allowed to thrive for too long. A system that makes assumptions about people based on the way they look, the way they speak, or the way they dress. And that system isn't just out there." He gestured toward the city skyline visible through the windows. "It's here, within Skylink." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. "But let me be clear," Elijah said, his tone rising with conviction. "This is not a moment for blame. It's a moment for accountability, for reflection, for change, and that change starts with me." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've always believed that Skylink could be more than just an airline, that we could set a standard not just for service but for humanity. But we can't do that if we ignore the problems within our own walls." Elijah outlined the measures being put in place: training, audits, and reporting channels, and emphasized that this was just the beginning. "Change won't happen overnight," he said, "but it will happen, and it will take all of us to make it stick." When he finished speaking, the room erupted into applause, some hesitant, others thunderous. Elijah saw Maria Sanchez in the back, her hands clapping enthusiastically, a look of hope on her face. It was a small victory, but one that reminded him why this fight mattered. As the day wound down, Elijah returned to his office, exhausted but resolute. The torn ticket still sat on his desk, now joined by a new frame. Inside was a printed copy of Maria's email, a reminder of the people who were counting on him to lead by example. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but Elijah Carter was ready. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about creating a new one, built on respect, dignity, and the belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserved to belong. The viral spark. The morning after Skylink's internal town hall meeting, the world outside Elijah Carter's office seemed to shift into overdrive. News outlets had picked up the viral video from the airport incident, running headlines that ranged from measured reporting to sensationalism. "Airline CEO faces racism in his own company," read one. "Gate agent tears up first-class ticket of prominent black businessmen," proclaimed another. Social media was ablaze with conversations, debates, and fiery commentary. Elijah leaned back in his chair, scrolling through the trending posts on his tablet. There were calls for boycotts, heartfelt stories of similar experiences from others, and demands for reform across the entire airline industry. While the public outcry was overwhelming, it also brought a unique opportunity, a chance to amplify the change Skylink had already begun to set in motion. Evelyn Rousseau burst into his office without knocking, her usually calm demeanor tinged with urgency. She held a thick folder and her phone, which was vibrating incessantly with incoming calls and notifications. "Elijah, it's everywhere," she said, placing the folder on his desk. "The video has been shared over 3 million times, and major outlets want interviews." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "And what's the general sentiment?" Evelyn sighed, sinking into the chair across from him. "It's a mixed bag. Most people are supportive. They see you as someone who's experienced the very thing you're trying to fight against. But there's also criticism. Some think this is a publicity stunt, that you let this happen to stir up attention." Elijah frowned, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "Publicity stunt? Do they think I orchestrated my own humiliation for clicks?" "It's the internet," Evelyn replied, shrugging. "People will spin anything. But that's not the majority view. Most are calling for systemic change, not just at Skylink, but across the airline industry. This incident has opened a floodgate." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then we use it." That afternoon, Skylink held a press conference, The room was packed with reporters from every major outlet, their cameras trained on the stage where Elijah and Evelyn sat. Behind them, a large screen displayed Skylink's logo alongside the words, "Accountability, Change, Action." Evelyn stepped to the podium first, her voice clear and authoritative. "Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. The incident at the airport involving our CEO, Elijah Carter, has sparked an important conversation, one that we, as a company, cannot shy away from. Skylink is committed to addressing the systemic issues that allowed this to happen and to leading the industry in meaningful reform." She stepped aside, and Elijah took her place. His presence commanded the room, the weight of his experience evident in his posture and the steady tone of his voice. "I won't sugarcoat this," Elijah began. "What happened to me at the gate wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a larger problem. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last unless we confront the biases embedded in our systems, within Skylink and beyond." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "But this isn't about me. It's about the countless people who face these same barriers every day without the platform or privilege to speak out. It's about ensuring that no one, no matter their race, gender, or background, has to question their worth or their place." Elijah outlined the steps Skylink was taking, the independent audits, the mandatory training, and the public acknowledgement of the company's shortcomings. He also announced a new initiative, the Equity in Travel Alliance, ETA, a coalition of airlines and industry leaders dedicated to creating inclusive practices across the board. "This isn't a PR move," he said firmly, his gaze sweeping the room. "This is personal. This is necessary. And this is just the beginning." The press conference ended with a standing ovation from some of the reporters, while others furiously typed notes into their laptops. The questions that followed were sharp but respectful, focusing on Skylink's commitment to transparency and the specifics of the ETA initiative. As the day wore on, Elijah found himself in back-to-back meetings, navigating the internal and external fallout of the incident. But in the midst of the chaos, there were moments that reminded him why this fight mattered. One such moment came when Maria Sanchez, the junior customer service agent, emailed him again. This time, her message was longer, more personal. Subject: inspired to speak up. "Mr. Carter, after watching the press conference today, I felt compelled to share something I've never told anyone at Skylink. 2 years ago, I applied for a promotion to a supervisory role. Despite meeting all the qualifications, I was passed over for someone with less experience. When I asked why, I was told, 'You're great with people, but we're looking for someone with more authority.' I knew what they meant. It was about how I looked, not how I performed. Hearing you speak today gave me hope that things can change. Thank you for fighting for all of us. Maria." Elijah read her email twice, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and resolve. He replied immediately, asking if she would be willing to share her story as part of Skylink's efforts to confront bias. Her response was swift and affirmative. By evening, Skylink's social media platforms were flooded with messages of support and personal stories from employees and customers alike. The company had also launched an internal platform called Speak Freely, allowing employees to anonymously share their experiences and suggestions for improvement. Evelyn stopped by Elijah's office as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. She carried 2 cups of coffee and set one on his desk. "It's been a hell of a day," she said, sitting across from him. Elijah chuckled softly, understatement of the year. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression serious. "You did good today, Elijah, but you know this is just the beginning, right?" He nodded, lifting his coffee. "I know, but if today proved anything, it's that people are ready for change. And so am I." As the night deepened, Elijah stayed in his office, working late into the evening. The torn ticket still sat on his desk, a silent witness to the progress being made. It was far from over, but for the first time, He felt like they were on the right track. And for Elijah Carter, that was enough to keep fighting, confronting the system. The following week brought a storm of activity at Skylink headquarters. The incident at the gate had become a flashpoint for a much larger conversation about systemic inequality, not only in the airline industry, but across corporate America. News outlets, social media, and even late-night talk shows were discussing Elijah Carter, the gate agent, and Skylink's response. The pressure was mounting, and Elijah knew this was a pivotal moment. Elijah stood at the window of his office, staring out at the city skyline. The sun had just risen, casting a golden hue over the buildings. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," he said, turning to see Evelyn Rousseau and Darren, the policy analyst, enter the room. Evelyn was carrying a folder filled with notes, while Darren had a laptop tucked under his arm. "We have the findings from the initial culture audit," Evelyn said, placing the folder on Elijah's desk. Her tone was serious. "It's not great." Elijah sighed, picking up the folder and flipping through the pages. As he scanned the contents, his expression grew darker. The audit revealed deeply ingrained biases within Skylink's operations, hiring practices that favored certain demographics, promotions often influenced by unspoken stereotypes, and a lack of representation in leadership roles. The report also highlighted feedback from employees, many of whom expressed fear of retaliation if they spoke out about discrimination. "This isn't just bad, it's systemic," Elijah said, his voice heavy. "This is bigger than one gate agent or one torn ticket. It's in the bones of this company." Evelyn nodded. "We anticipated some of this, but the scale is overwhelming." Darren chimed in. "We've outlined a plan to address these issues, but it's going to require a complete overhaul of certain policies and practices. It won't be easy, and it definitely won't be quick." Elijah leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Easy and quick aren't what we're aiming for. We're aiming for lasting change." That afternoon, Elijah convened a meeting with Skylink's executive team. The conference room was packed, the tension palpable. On the large screen at the front of the room was a presentation titled, "Path to Equity: Rebuilding Skylink from Within." Darren led the presentation, outlining the findings of the audit and the proposed changes. These included blind hiring practices. Resumes would be anonymized to remove identifying details, ensuring candidates were evaluated solely on their qualifications. Transparent promotion criteria. A clear, standardized framework for promotions would be implemented to eliminate subjective biases. Diversity in leadership. A commitment to achieving a minimum of 30% representation of underrepresented groups in leadership roles within 5 years. Mandatory training and accountability. All employees, starting with the executive team, would undergo comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion training with periodic assessments. Employee Advocacy Board. An independent body composed of employees from various levels and backgrounds to oversee the company's progress and provide recommendations. As Darren concluded, Elijah stood up, his gaze sweeping the room. "I know this feels like a lot," he began. "Change always does. But this isn't just about Skylink. It's about setting an example for the industry and, more importantly, doing what's right." Peter, one of the senior executives, raised his hand. "Elijah, these changes are ambitious, but won't they disrupt operations? How do we balance this with maintaining profitability?" Elijah's expression hardened. "Peter, if our profitability comes at the expense of fairness and humanity, then it's not worth it. Skylink has the resources to do this. And if we get it right, it won't just benefit our employees. It'll benefit our customers, our reputation, and our bottom line in the long run." The room fell silent, the weight of Elijah's words sinking in. Slowly, heads began to nod. The executives weren't just agreeing, they were committing. A week later, Skylink held a company-wide virtual town hall to announce the changes. Employees tuned in from airports, offices, and their homes, the anticipation palpable. Elijah addressed them from the same conference room where the plan had been crafted. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Skylink," he began. "We've heard your voices, and we're taking action, not just to address what's broken, but to build something better. This is a journey, and it will take time. But together, we can create a company that truly values every individual." He outlined the initiatives, emphasizing transparency and employee involvement. At the end of his speech, he opened the floor for questions. The first came from Maria Sanchez, who had been invited to speak. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "how can we ensure that these changes aren't just words on paper? How do we make sure they stick?" Elijah smiled, impressed by her directness. "That's a great question, Maria. The truth is, change will only stick if we all hold each other accountable. That's why we're forming the Employee Advocacy Board, and it's why I'm asking every one of you to stay engaged. This isn't about me or the executives. It's about us as a collective." Maria nodded, her expression one of cautious optimism. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Over the next few months, the changes began to take shape. The hiring process was overhauled, leadership workshops were conducted, and the Employee Advocacy Board was established. Skylink also launched the Equity in Travel Alliance, ETA, bringing together other airlines to discuss industry-wide reforms. Publicly, Skylink became a beacon of progress. The hashtag Rebuilding Skylink trended as customers and employees shared their stories of positive change. The company's commitment to equity drew praise from activists and organizations, further solidifying its reputation as a leader in the fight against systemic bias. Privately, Elijah knew the work was far from over. There were still challenges to overcome, resistance to face, and progress to monitor. But as he sat in his office one evening, watching the sunset over the city, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The torn ticket, now encased in glass, sat on his desk, a reminder of the moment that had sparked it all. It wasn't just a symbol of pain, it was a symbol of possibility. And for Elijah Carter, possibility was everything. A legacy of change. Months turned into a year since the incident at the gate, a year filled with transformation, challenges, and milestones for Skylink International. Elijah Carter's vision of change was no longer just a plan on paper, but a movement that reverberated through the company and beyond. Sitting in the boardroom of Skylink's headquarters, Elijah reflected on how far they had come. The room was filled with a mix of familiar faces, executives who had weathered the storm with him, and new faces, individuals who had been brought in as part of the company's push for greater diversity and fresh perspectives. Today's meeting was special, marking the one-year anniversary of the company's internal initiative, Skylink Rising, a commitment to equity. The meeting began with Evelyn Russo presenting the year's progress. Over the past year, Skylink has implemented more than 85% of the recommendations from our cultural audit, she began, her tone professional yet triumphant. We've increased representation in leadership positions by 25%, and our blind hiring initiative has led to a more diverse workforce across all levels. She clicked to the next slide, showing a bar graph with employee satisfaction scores. We've also seen a 40% increase in employee engagement, particularly among historically underrepresented groups. The anonymous feedback we've received shows that employees feel safer, more valued, and more hopeful about their future at Skylink. The room erupted in applause, but Elijah held up a hand to quiet them. "This is excellent progress," he said, his tone measured, "but let's not lose sight of the work that still lies ahead. Progress is only sustainable if we remain vigilant." Later that day, Elijah attended a public event hosted by the Equity in Travel Alliance, ETA. Representatives from airlines, travel agencies, and advocacy groups gathered to share their progress and challenges in creating more equitable practices. Skylink was seen as a leader in this space, and Elijah was the keynote speaker. Standing on stage, Elijah addressed the crowd. "When we launched the Equity in Travel Alliance, We didn't do it to pat ourselves on the back or win awards. We did it because we recognized a fundamental truth, that equity isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a necessity. It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive, no matter where they come from or what they look like. He paused, scanning the faces in the audience. But let's be honest, change is hard. It's messy. It challenges our comfort zones and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. At Skylink, we learned it the hard way. The incident at the gate wasn't an isolated event. It was a wake-up call, a mirror showing us our flaws. And we chose to face those flaws head-on. Elijah spoke about the initiatives Skylink had undertaken, emphasizing the importance of accountability and transparency. We're not perfect, he admitted, and we never will be. But perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. The audience gave him a standing ovation, their applause a testament to the impact of his words. Back at Skylink headquarters, Elijah received an unexpected visitor. Maria Sanchez, the customer service agent who had been one of the first to speak out during the aftermath of the incident, was now a supervisor and a member of the Employee Advocacy Board. She walked into his office with a folder in hand. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady but tinged with excitement, "I wanted to share something with you." Elijah gestured for her to sit. "Please, Maria, call me Elijah. What's on your mind?" She handed him the folder. Inside was a proposal for a mentorship program aimed at empowering employees from underrepresented backgrounds to pursue leadership roles within the company. This program would pair employees with senior leaders, giving them guidance, support, and opportunities to grow, Maria explained. "I think it could help bridge the gap for people who feel overlooked or unsure about their potential." Elijah read through the proposal, impressed by its thoughtfulness and practicality. "This is excellent, Maria," he said. "Let's make it happen. And I want you to lead it." Maria's eyes widened. "Me? I'm just." Elijah cut her off gently. "You're not just anything. You're exactly the kind of leader Skylink needs. This company is better because of people like you, people who care enough to make a difference." In the following months, the mentorship program, named Lift Off, became one of Skylink's most successful initiatives. Employees who had once felt marginalized now had a clear path to growth, and the program's success inspired similar efforts across other companies in the industry. As Skylink continued to evolve, so did Elijah. He had become a symbol of resilience and leadership, not just within his company, but across the business world. Invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and even government panels flooded his office. But Elijah always made time for his employees, ensuring they knew that their voices mattered most. On a quiet evening, Elijah found himself back at the airport where the infamous gate incident had occurred. He wasn't there for a flight this time. He was there to meet with the ground staff as part of Skylink's ongoing efforts to stay connected with its frontline employees. Walking through the terminal, he spotted a familiar face, the gate agent who had torn up his ticket. She was no longer in uniform, her posture more subdued than before. She approached him hesitantly, clutching a folder of her own. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice shaking, "I wanted to apologize again for what happened. I've been attending the training sessions and I've realized how much I didn't understand back then." Elijah regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What matters," he said finally, "is what you do with that understanding now. Are you ready to make amends, not just to me, but to the people you interact with every day?" She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I am." Elijah extended a hand. "Then let's move forward." As he left the airport that night, Elijah felt a sense of closure. The torn ticket, once a symbol of pain, had become a catalyst for transformation. Skylink was far from perfect, but it was on a path towards something greater, a path that Elijah had paved with resilience, integrity, and a relentless commitment to justice. Sitting in the backseat of his car, Elijah looked out at the city lights. He thought about the legacy he was building, not just for Skylink, but for every person who had ever been made to feel less than they were. It wasn't just a company he was shaping, it was a movement. And as long as he had breath, Elijah Carter would keep moving forward. The flight forward. A year and a half after the gate incident, Skylink International had become a beacon of hope in an industry known for its entrenched practices. The company's transformation was not without its struggles. Change had brought resistance, difficult conversations, and moments of doubt, but it had also brought undeniable progress. Elijah Carter sat in a private Skylink hangar, where a special ceremony was about to take place. In the hangar, a gleaming new plane stood ready to join Skylink's fleet. Its name, boldly painted near the cockpit, was Equity. This was no ordinary plane. It was a symbol of the company's journey and a commitment to keep moving forward. As employees, industry leaders, and journalists gathered, Maria Sanchez stood on stage, preparing to introduce Elijah. Now a senior executive in Skylink's employee advocacy division, Maria was a living testament to the company's progress. She took the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "When I first joined Skylink, I never imagined I'd be standing here today," Maria began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But thanks to the changes we've made, and the leadership of Mr. Carter, we've shown that equity isn't just a goal, it's a foundation. It's what keeps us moving forward." The audience erupted in applause as Maria introduced Elijah. Dressed in a sharp suit and standing taller than ever, Elijah walked to the stage with quiet confidence. He took a moment to let the applause wash over him, then began to speak. "Today is about more than unveiling a new plane," he said, his voice resonant. "It's about acknowledging the journey that brought us here. It's about recognizing that change is possible when we face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is." He gestured to the plane behind him. "This aircraft, Equity, isn't just a name. It's a promise. A promise that Skylink will continue to fight for fairness, dignity, and opportunity, not just within our company, but across the industry." Elijah spoke about the milestones Skylink had achieved: increased diversity in leadership, a thriving mentorship program, industry-wide reforms through the Equity and Travel Alliance, and most importantly, the cultural shift within the company. Employees no longer feared retaliation for speaking out. They felt heard, valued, and empowered. But Elijah also emphasized that the work wasn't done. "Progress is a journey, not a destination," he said. "And while we've come a long way, we must remain vigilant. The moment we think the work is over, we risk falling back into old habits." As the ceremony concluded, Elijah stood at the edge of the stage, watching the plane named Equity. He thought back to the torn ticket, now displayed in Skylink's headquarters as a reminder of the company's turning point. That small, painful moment had sparked a transformation far greater than he could have imagined. Later that evening, Elijah found himself in his office, reflecting on everything that had unfolded over the past 18 months. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Evelyn Rousseau. "You're still here," she said, setting a coffee cup on his desk. "I figured you'd be out celebrating." Elijah smiled. "Celebration can wait. There's always more to do." Evelyn took a seat, her expression thoughtful. "You've changed the company, Elijah. And not just Skylink. You've set a standard for the whole industry. That's no small thing." He nodded, his smile fading slightly. "It's not just about changing a company or an industry. It's about changing how we see each other, how we treat each other. And that's a much bigger fight." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that agent hadn't torn your ticket? If none of this had happened?" Elijah considered the question, then shook his head. "It's not about what could have been. It's about what is, and what can be." That moment was painful, but it gave us an opportunity. And we took it. In the years that followed, Skylink's initiatives became a model for other companies, both within and outside the airline industry. Elijah Carter continued to lead with integrity, his story inspiring countless others to challenge the status quo and push for meaningful change. The torn ticket, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a symbol of resilience and progress, a reminder that even the smallest moments can spark the greatest transformations. And as Elijah boarded a Skylink flight one evening, he looked out the window at the city lights below, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over, but the course was set, and the destination was worth every step. For Elijah Carter and Skylink International, the skies had never been clearer.